2 years ago, I was given the esteemed privilege, thanks to two people in this room, you know who you are, to become, I didn't turn it on. There we go, let's start well. La, la, okay. To become this. Molding young minds as an adjunct faculty member at every single four-year college in the Macon area. I generally teach business and development economics because of my background in development. And I sometimes teach first-year experience courses, and sometimes I teach first-year seminars, sometimes I teach business communication, and sometimes they tell me to run and I do it. But generally, all of my classes end up somehow, mine's doing it now too, being about feelings. How are you feeling today? Well, I, for one, I'm a little bit nervous about my presentation because it keeps doing this skip thing. Other people have experienced it. I'm ecstatic to be here, and I'm really sad to be leaving Macon on Tuesday. The thing about feelings is that they're complicated, and the reason why I talk about them is because most of my students are afraid to feel, which I find horrifying for future generations. If you can't have feelings, how do you connect to people? So I'm going to force a little feelings on you today. In 2011, the largest online retailer was caught in a neighborhood paper expose about their horrible labor practices. We're talking third world sweatshop labor practices. Temperatures of 115 degrees in the afternoon in their warehouses. People falling down in line waiting for water. And this really was the water cooler from the expose. And people being carried out on stretchers. They make a lot of money. How are you feeling? In 2012, at the RNC, Republican National Convention, this man, Stephen Hill, who's a captain in the army serving in Iraq, submitted a YouTube video to the candidates saying, "Are you going to reinstate Don't Ask, Don't Tell?" He was booed by over 25 people in the audience. How are you feeling? This big box hardware store, this CEO makes over $11.1 million a year in total packages. His lowest paid employees are minimum wage workers, of which almost all of them, if they're single, are on government benefits, which your tax dollars pay for, despite the fact they've had record-breaking profits of 10% on average per year for a decade. How are you feeling? What feelings did you have? Probably had something. Most of you are going to have one of these four. Contempt, either for the CEO or the underpaid worker who's using your tax dollars. You might have empathy because you've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. You might have pity because, oh, thank God it's not you in that position. And you may have just plain old sympathy. But what really are these feelings? Contempt is the easiest one to explain. It's the feeling that a person or a thing is beneath consideration, worthless, or deserving scorn. Those are three very different things, if you take my opinion on this. Being beneath consideration and worthless are diametrically opposed. That's still what contempt is defined as. On the other hand, the hardest to have, but one of the second easiest to explain, is empathy, which is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. It's really not so easy to do unless you've actually been there. You can't really say, oh, I've never had minimum wage and I feel for you and I share your feelings, because you don't actually know what those feelings are. You can pretend you do, but that really becomes something else, which is sympathy. Oh, no, pity. It skipped again, which is pity. And that's the feeling of sorrow caused by the suffering and misfortune of others. And then sympathy is its close cousin, which is a feeling of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune. Let's make it more personal, though. Let's say you have a coworker who's getting a divorce. You probably start in the pity and sympathy category. Oh, thank goodness it's not me. Oh, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. And if you have gone through a divorce, you might have some empathy. It might be, yeah, you're getting divorced. I've been there. It was awesome. Or it might be, ooh, dude, I'm so sorry. That's so hard. I feel for you. If you haven't gotten divorced, don't even try to have empathy. You're lying to yourself if you can. And finally, you might be surprised, but I guarantee you there's going to creep in a little bit about contempt in there. Why? Because they're going to be at court dates, and if they're your coworker and you share responsibilities, you're going to be worried about yourself. Almost guarantee you, Most people I know are pretty giving and loving, but they still think about themselves first. I understand that. I've been there. I've definitely had all of these feelings at one time. In 2006, I dropped out of college and moved to Cambodia to be a journalist and work in development. And I spent a lot of time here in Stungman Che. It's a garbage dump, and it's where people actually live. Yes, those are houses. Yes, it's on top of a pile of garbage. It was awful. And I met a little boy named Sopiep, who was a beggar, who lived in Stungman Che. And when I first met him, I had all this pity and sympathy, and I was so sad. He'd ask me for $1, and I'd give it to him, and I'd be like, oh, I'm helping. No, I'm not. And then I would try to have empathy. I've never lived here, so that didn't work. And then I started to feel a lot of contempt creeping in. I started pushing him away. I'm like, I'm already giving you a bunch of dollars. You have other opportunities. One of the organizations I worked for gave those to people. And he just wasn't that engaged. He was more interested in this. The problem is that all these feelings don't create change. You stay stuck for good. And you stay in this cycle. Pity, sympathy, maybe some empathy if you can. Contempt, pity, sympathy, contempt. Over and over and over again. What I think is most important is compassion. Now, compassion is a very hard one to define. I looked in 7 dictionaries, and none of their definitions did anything to explain what compassion actually meant based on the etymology of the word. The etymology of the word comes from common pati, which basically means to bear suffering together. That's really hard to do. To actually be willing to engage with a suffering person and to recognize suffering in one another. I studied Tibetan philosophy in undergrad. And one of the things that's really cool about Tibetan philosophy is that they engage in their whole practice for other people, not for themselves. They're not trying to save themselves. All of their chanting, their Om Mani Padme Hums, their huge amounts of prayer flags are sending positive things out into the universe because they see us as interconnected and see us as intrinsically suffering somewhere. We're either suffering because our work sucks, we're suffering because we don't have enough money, someone we know is dying, well, we're all dying because none of us are getting younger. And they see that, and they acknowledge that, and they really attach to that. And to them, that is compassion. And I'm going to argue that is compassion, doing what you do for yourself and for others. Now, the problem with compassion is that it's really, really hard. It requires the willingness to accept someone for who they are, even if you hate them. To actually accept them for who they are. That requires a lot of bravery. A lot of bravery. And it also requires vulnerability. Vulnerability is hard, especially if you're not quite sure if that person sees you for who you are willingly. And you might have to deal with pain and sadness and frustration and take it in of yourself and deal with it. It's really difficult because, let's face it, it's difficult to be brave, vulnerable, and willing to accept others in such an uncompassionate world. Our world is not very compassionate. There are very few people who live and breathe compassion on a daily basis. And even if you try, you're probably gonna meet with a lot of resistance, which means you stop trying. The other problem is that most compassion, you're not really having compassion when you think you're having it. The feeling's not really authentic. Like the picture I showed you of Stungman Che, that's not authentic. Why? Well, you don't know these people. You don't know these things. You know those great ads where the puppy comes on TV and you hear Angel playing in the background by Sarah McLachlan, and you're just like, oh my God, I want to save this dog. You don't know this dog. You're never going to know this dog. And whatever money you give, you're actually not doing anything for that dog. You're doing something for the people who help those dogs. All dogs. All dogs. Or you're helping someone pay a salary, right? Same goes for the kids in Stungman Che. If I show you a picture like this, you're going to say, oh man, it's so sad that they're playing with these containers, and there's this naked child in this way overgrown t-shirt, neither of them have shoes. Oh man, I hurt. This is sad. You still don't know them. You haven't accepted them for who they are. You have no experience with these people. You're just having feelings. You're not really feeling compassionate. Same thing goes with Sopiep. This is not Sopiep, this is where Sopiep lives. You're not really sure who Sopiep is because you never met him. I've met him. And what I told you was he at first was asking for begging for money, right? I didn't tell you the next part of the story. The issue with that is all these pictures are considered philanthroporn. And I use this word in my classes all the time, and they laugh at me and giggle, oh, she said porn. It's true, though. Porn, the second definition in all dictionaries that I could find, was the depiction of acts in a sensational manner so as to arouse a quick, intense, emotional reaction. So it's that of philanthropy. Again, you're not actually knowing what's going on. You're not actually feeling. What if I told you this was actually the picture of Sophia? And I showed you this picture first. I was like, look at Sophia, he was a beggar. And then we put him in school and in a uniform. You're not going to donate to the organization. You don't want to see pictures of things that are happy, because then you actually have to accept them for they are and that things have changed and you're making change better and you're actually doing things. No, you want to be mired because it doesn't require the same amount of kind of integration of feelings. Because it's still sad, but it's also happy. Let's go back to your coworker. How do you find compassion with your coworker? Well, put aside contempt, and you say, what can I do for you? I see you. I see you struggling. We all struggle. I don't understand your struggle, but show me your struggle. Help me to see your struggle. If we go back to the beginning, this is where things get sticky. You'll say, okay, so I'm going to show compassion to the minimum wage worker, and I'm going to feel for them. And then you can say the CEO is going to do the same thing and raise their salaries. That is not enough. It's one-sided. There's a flip side to the CEO. He gave up everything. Maybe his family, maybe years in school, sleepless nights, traveling away from his daughter, all sorts of things to get where he is. That is also a struggle. It comes out with a lot of money. But until both are willing to see each other, we live in a very one-sided world. Let's go back to Stephen Hill. You can feel bad that Stephen Hill got booed, but unless you can also feel bad for the bigot who booed him, because he's defending his freedom, even though he doesn't necessarily want to defend that person's freedom, he does it day in and day out. Until you can have compassion for both of them, nothing in this world will change. To me, compassion is the way to change the world. Thank you.